So today I'm going to be taking a look at the newest watch from Scurfa. I've never experienced this brand at all. It kind of even wasn't on my radar that much until I think I heard about this watch on a podcast or something, probably 40 and 20 or something like that. And it looked interesting. It was different, it had a unique design, and I got one, so let's look at it. So we have a diameter of about 41 millimeters, and then with the bumpers, it's closer to 43 and a half. We have a lug to lug of 49, a height of 12.4, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch: we're going to have a slightly domed sapphire crystal in here with inner air coating. We're also going to have 300 meters of stated water resistance, and thankfully they didn't have to put it on the front of the watch. We have a nice screw down crown, BGW9 for all the applied lume, and in the back we're going to have the Miyota 9015 running away in here with a little bit of artwork on the case back, a little bit more general text on the back there. And my watch is currently running at about +8, +9 seconds a day, which definitely is not too bad. And last but not least, the watch retails for about $506 converted, but it's 368.33 pounds. And that's without VAT, I believe. So starting with the dial here, and it's pretty cool overall. As you can see, we have this kind of fun honeycomb texture embossed into the dial. We have like a raised Scurfa logo there. These kind of, what I'm going to just call tic-tac markers all around the watch. No marker here at the 3 o'clock because we have the date, and then a triangular pip over here, not pip, but triangular marker here at 12. Looking at the hands here, we can see they have the pretty much exact same shape as the hour markers, except a little bit smaller. I think that's one area where they kind of messed up. They should have made them the exact same width. I think it looks a little off with them being a little bit smaller than the actual markers themselves, but small little design issue. Very, very minimal text on the dial, just the Scurfa watch's logo at top, model name Treasure Seeker at the very bottom. Very simply done, pretty monochromatic, just black and white on the dial, obviously white, black bezel with the white infill, black seconds track on the outside, and of course what's supposed to be white lume, but as you can tell it goes a little bit creamish, a little bit more greener leaning than the actual pure white of the dial. One thing I like about the design of the dial is the fact that they've blacked out the looms and the surrounds of all the minute markers, or the hour markers rather, and I think that looks really nice. It adds a little bit more contrast, ties in with the monochromatic nature of the watch, and it's just a really good addition. The only other thing I would have done is probably outlined the date window in black as well, but small little detail. Zooming in on the dial here, and it's overall pretty well done. The kind of black application to the hands and the lume, very kind of inky, very well put together. There aren't any like blotches or raised portions or just kind of imperfections along it, so really good application there. The lume itself too, really nicely and finely packed in, no pieces missing, no specks within them, so really nicely done there. The actual hour markers are a little bit different. As you can see there at the 11 o'clock, there's a tiny little dust mark or black speck. The same with the Scurfa logo right above the C. There's kind of a little speck. But overall, I mean, the dial looks pretty darn good and it's pretty well finished. There aren't really any imperfections. The text is all done really well. The texture itself is pretty cool and pretty well defined. I think at this magnification though, you can tell even more that the actual tone of the lume doesn't really match the dial. I mean, that's just a pet peeve that I have. The Omega Seamaster in white is the exact same way, but people love that watch, so maybe this watch still will be for you. It's just a detail that I notice. And then looking at the date window here, we can see it's done in this kind of like silvery date disc. I don't know why they didn't go for a white. I mean, obviously it doesn't look too bad, it doesn't contrast too much, but I think if they went out of the way to make it silver, they should have at least done it in white to match the dial. But who knows, maybe silver looked better and they've already tested the white date dials and I'm just being a little picky. Overall, not a badly done dial, really not any major imperfections, just little specks of dust or debris here and there, but nothing too major. Moving on to the case of this watch, and I think it's a pretty cool case overall. As you can see, we have this bumper style, which effectively makes the diameter a little bit larger, but not too big of a deal, it still wears well. We have this mainly vertical brushing on the lug tops here with a little bit of a chamfer running along the side. Relatively thin mid case here with a vertically brush application, but a high polish on the bumpers there. You can see kind of blasted crown that has TS for Treasure Seeker, which is the model name, which is a little fun touch. Drilled lug holes, of course, which is always lovely to see, makes strap changing super easy, and pretty much every brand should use them. One other thing I will say is the kind of curvature of the case is really nice. As you can see, the lugs pretty much dip down to go just below, if not right about the case back, so it does conform really nicely to the wrist. The bezel knurling is something I haven't seen before. It has, as you can see, this kind of square pattern all around it. The bezel is definitely not the hardest to grip, but it's also not the grippiest either. It does turn well though. It has a very nice defined click to it. It doesn't have any back play, which is nice. I think if you kind of let just the bezel run without me talking, it can sound a little bit tinny, and I think that's an area they could definitely improve on. But I mean, small detail, and honestly, I really never use my dive bezels. As you can see, a very, very glossy bezel here. I don't believe it's ceramic. It might be, but I'm not sure. I'll correct it right here if it's not. But very, very glossy bezel. Again, ties in really nicely with the other black elements on the watch, which is nice to see. Looking at the bracelet, here we have this kind of pseudo Jubilee style with a kind of thicker mid-link in there. Looks interesting, doesn't overly clash with the watch design, I don't think, so not too bad. Goes to a nice fold-over clasp. Very, very defined click, not too thick of a clasp either, and 3 holes of micro adjust. Would I like to see a little bit more there, but you know. As you can see, regular just push pin links there. Nothing too crazy. And again, just one last look at the artwork on the case back. Really nicely done. It's very deeply engraved in there. And it's a nice touch. Obviously, the Miyota 9015 isn't some crazy, beautifully finished movement, so this is definitely not too bad looking at. So moving on to how the watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing my Doxa Sub 200, and if the reason's not already clear, is because they look kind of similar. You know, they have similar color themes with the white dial and the monochromatic nature. And one thing I wanted to bring up is just kind of how the Doxa manages to match the lume to the dial a little bit better than the Scurfa does. I don't know what it is. This leans a little bit more yellow-green in the tint of the lume, where this is, while not perfectly white like the dial, just a little bit closer and more tolerable to me. And then here we have the Scurfa on my 6.5-inch wrist. As you can see, it wears pretty well. The lug to lug, while being long, is still very, very manageable, especially since they turn down the lug so heavily. It sits pretty closely to the wrist, despite being a little bit of a thicker watch. Nice to see that there's female end links rather than male end links, and really no uncomfortability with the wear. It doesn't have any sharp corners or anything. There's no unnecessary digging when I flex my wrist. So pretty comfortable overall. Then looking at the side shot there, again, really conforms super nicely to the wrist. So really no complaints at all. For the first combo, we have this nice rubber strap that's actually included with the purchase. Not too bad of a strap, and a little bit of branding right there too. There we have it on my wrist. My 6.5-inch wrist is at the second to last hole. So if your wrist is much smaller than mine, this strap probably won't fit you, but don't worry. Plenty of other cheaper options out there, but it is a nice included strap. Next, we have this Barton Elite silicone strap. Nice little khaki tone, adds a little bit of color to the watch, but doesn't overpower anything, so looks cool. There we go. Fits pretty comfortably, fits a lot better than the other rubber strap did that was included, but hey, can't expect the world out of a free strap, so not too bad. A little bit of texture to go with the texture of the dial, and pretty comfortable. And lastly, the Archer silicone strap. All white tones, makes it very bright, very summery. Of course, the tones don't match perfectly, and of course, the lume doesn't match perfectly, but not too shabby either way. And there we have it, really comfortable combo. Again, the watch wears pretty slimly to the wrist overall, so not too many complaints. Taking a look at the lume here, as we see, we have BGW9 on both the dial and the bezel. Pretty good glow, pretty even overall, which is pretty nice to see. As you can see, it's even bright enough to slightly illuminate the dial, which is never too shabby. So pretty good job on the lume. We even have a tiny little bit on the end of the seconds hand, so you can actually tell time in the dark down to the second if you really wanted to. Reluming and comparing to the Timex, you can see the color temperatures are pretty similar. The brightness is pretty similar. Like the Scurfa did a pretty good job on the lume, and really I don't have any complaints there. So pros and cons of the Scurfa, and one of the biggest pros for me is it wears really well. It is a 41mm case without the kind of bumpers, and I think like 43.5 with them. And it wears surprisingly well. It has a nice curvature to the mid case. It wears very much like Seiko cases wear. It wears smaller than you would expect. It doesn't wear like something slab-sided like a Tudor, or even like Hamilton's usually pretty bad. You feel every millimeter of those watches, right? So it's nice to see a watch that actually fits well despite being a little bit on the larger side. My next pro for the watch is going to be it has a really cool dial. I love the kind of tic-tac markers, tic-tac hands, or I guess more batonish hands, and the honeycomb dial texture. It's not something it's not something we've really seen before. I think it looks cool. They come in a couple of pretty fun colors, especially like the yellow variation, which is something you don't really see outside of maybe Doxa. So it's kind of nice to have a uniquer design, a fun dial, and something that's not overly repetitive. It's not Mercedes hands. It's not a triangular pip at 12. It's uniquely Scurfa, and I don't, off the top of my head, recall anything that looks quite like it. And adding on to that point, my last pro will be just the fact that it's a unique design. Again, it's not trying to be repetitive of anything. It's its own thing. It brings something to the table that other watches don't really have, like the honeycomb dial, like the fun colors. And it's just cool to see that. It's fun, especially in this kind of micro brand world, to see these things that are different, the brands that are trying something new and they don't know if it's going to work or not, but thankfully most of the time it does, and it just benefits everybody because you get something cooler for a pretty affordable price, and you don't have to play games with any other brands. Now moving on to cons, one of the bigger cons for me is going to be the handset, and mainly the sizing of it. Again, I mentioned that the hands were a little too thin in regards to the hour markers because the hour markers were thicker. I think the dial itself would look much more homogeneous, much more in harmony with itself had the hands been the exact same size as the markers were. I don't know if there was an actual design or mechanical limitation to that, and I don't think there would be. So if there is a new like 2.0 version of this Treasure Seeker, I think that would be a very small tweak that would pay out very greatly. My next con for the watch is just going to be the color mismatch between the lume and the dial itself. I have this, my problem with the lume usually is the fact that it's C3 and it has a slightly green tint, but then my problem also becomes when there's a white dial, it's very hard to near impossible to match the white dial with the whiteness of a lume signature. And it's completely a pet peeve of mine. I know people love the Omega Seamaster in white, and that one has the exact same problem. The lume and the dial do not match at all. So if that doesn't bother you, this won't be a con for you, but for me, it's something I noticed, it's something I don't like. That's why if I go white dials, I usually go for numerals or stainless steel applied indices rather than something with lume in it. My last con of the watch is just going to be the Scurfa logo itself. It's not bad by any means, and I think on this model, it's one of the least offensive applications of it. But I think other than this model, one I really wanted to buy was the blue dial, the kind of, I believe, lighter blue. I don't know what the colorway is called, but with that one it was very weird because the dial was a very light blue and then the Scurfa logo was like in a darker blue. Why didn't they just make it a light blue like they did here with the white and the white? Because it still matches pretty well. It's just that it's kind of a oversight that I think shouldn't be excusable, right? And other than that, I just think the kind of boxy logo, maybe not the best application. If they can find some way to just maybe write it on the dial, it'd look a little cleaner, but not overly offensive, but just something I noticed. And I think it is a very cool watch. I don't know why, but for some reason I felt like the retail was maybe slightly high. The bezel didn't feel amazing. It has an interesting look to it, but I do think if it was like $50 to $100 cheaper, it'd be more reasonable to me. That's just the feeling that I get. Other than that, it still is an amazing watch. I think it is well made. The kind of main elements of the dial are really well executed. I would have liked to see a slight bit more depth in the honeycomb texture. It is a little bit too surfacey for me. A little bit more depth would have gone a long way, I think. And there's just a little bit of refinement that needs to be made. I think they can make the clasp a little bit better. They can make the dial a little bit better. They can increase the size of the hands, or at least the width of the hands. And all these small little details would make the watch not only more in harmony with itself, but I think more deserving of its current price point. Overall, if you love the design, I would say this is a great watch to go for. Again, it is a little bit more unique. It doesn't really look like any other dive watch on the market right now. And I think this white colorway in specific would be a very, very good litmus test for seeing if you like the white Omega Seamaster, because it gives that same vibe. It kind of looks the same in a lot of regards, and even like the mismatching of the Lume is similar. So if you like this watch, maybe it can be a nice replacement for the Seamaster, or even just kind of a stepping stone onto that watch. But overall, good watch, not immensely crazy value for money, but still well executed. And if you like it, I think you should get it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in another one.